When a black tech visionary walked into a billionaire family's gala, she expected respect, not a humiliating public mockery. What they didn't know was that she was the silent partner behind the $1 billion deal they'd been bragging about all night. And when she cancelled it, their empire shattered in real time. Subscribe now for more real justice, twist-packed stories that hit harder than Hollywood. Dr. Amara Holt stepped out of the sleek black sedan with the quiet confidence of a woman who had built empires, survived boardrooms packed with wolves, and walked away from every battle with more wisdom than wounds, yet nothing could have prepared her for the level of arrogance, entitlement, and casual cruelty she would meet that night inside the gilded hall of the Wentworth family estate, where chandeliers dripped with crystals the size of a child's fist and every corner sparkled with the excessive old money pretending it still owned more of the world than it truly did. Though Amara had learned long ago that wealth was not measured in diamonds or land but in the impact one left on others and the power to create opportunities for those barred from the table, and tonight she was supposed to be a silent, unnamed guest, anonymous, invisible, simply present to observe the family that her board had been negotiating a billion-dollar acquisition with for nearly 8 months, a deal intended to push her renewable energy tech into global markets while rescuing the declining Wentworth empire. Though they did not yet know the woman behind the proposal, the prototype, and the patents was the same woman now climbing their marble steps in a shimmering black gown cut low at the back and paired with simple gold jewelry that spoke of elegance without screaming for attention. She wanted no spotlight, no applause, only a clear view of the people who would soon have access to her life's work, because partnerships, especially ones with billions at stake, required trust, values, and integrity, 3 things she suspected the Wentworths lacked though she hoped to be proven wrong. Yet the moment she stepped into the ballroom, conversations paused too sharply, eyes darted too quickly, and whispers slithered like snakes through the air, the same kind of whispers she had heard back when she was the only black girl in an elite engineering program, when she had worked 3 jobs to afford textbooks while classmates inherited entire companies. The sting was familiar, almost nostalgic, but tonight she refused to shrink under anyone's gaze, especially not the gaze of Lila Wentworth, the eldest daughter, whose icy blue eyes scanned Amara from hair to heels before curling into a smirk that dripped with condescension as she leaned toward her circle of glittering friends and murmured loudly enough for Amara to hear, "I didn't realize we were letting in charity cases tonight," and the group laughed, sharp and brittle, the kind of laugh used not to express joy but to enforce hierarchy, yet Amara held her composure, offering a polite nod before continuing deeper into the crowd, determined not to let pettiness distract her from the truth she sought. Whether this family deserved access to her company, but each step introduced her to new layers of mockery cloaked in politeness, from the waiter who hesitated before handing her champagne as if unsure she belonged, to the silver-haired banker who asked if she was staff assisting with the event, to the young heir who joked loudly that diversity must be trending again, earning chuckles from investors who claimed to champion inclusion on their websites yet snickered behind closed doors, and Amara, who had once endured far worse in her rise to Forbes's innovators list, absorbed every insult like data, each moment becoming another reason to question the partnership. But the breaking point came when she wandered near the grand piano where the younger Wentworth siblings were gathered, including Mason Wentworth, the heir apparent to the empire and the man her board believed to be the family's only redeeming quality. He approached with a charming smile, his hair swept back perfectly, his tailored suit worth more than Amara's first car, and for a moment she glimpsed sincerity in his eyes as he said, "Welcome, I don't think we've met." But Lila swooped in like a vulture, grabbing his arm and dragging him closer to her circle where they had gathered around a giant cake shaped like the Wentworth crest, and with mock sweetness she announced, "Mason, darling, we were just discussing how bold it is for someone to come here dressed like they borrowed their gown from a TV drama." And before Amara could respond, another relative chimed in, "She probably thought this was a networking opportunity. Poor thing doesn't realize this party's not for recruiting employees," which sent another wave of laughter through the group, sharper this time, cutting deep enough to make Mason shift uncomfortably, though he still said nothing, a silence that disappointed Amara not because she needed defending but because silence from a leader was complicity, and she filed that silence away like a name on a blacklist. But when Lila pushed further, gesturing toward Amara's natural curls and whispering loudly, "I mean, did no one tell her this was a formal event?" the cruelty reached a point that even Mason could not ignore. He snapped, "That's enough," earning a pout from Lila, but the damage was done, and Amara, refusing to let them see her hurt, turned to leave the circle, her steps steady though her pulse raged, but as she walked away, she heard yet another relative snicker, "Maybe she cleans up well enough to pass for one of us," followed by a cold voice she would later recognize as Victor Wentworth, the patriarch himself, declaring, "People like her should be grateful we allow them in these rooms at all," and that was when something inside her shifted. Not anger, not pain, but clarity, the kind of clarity that felt like a steel door slamming shut. locking away any possibility of partnership, and while they laughed, smug and secure in their illusion of superiority, Amara reached calmly into her clutch, pulled out her phone, and typed a single message to her CFO. Terminate negotiations immediately. I'll explain soon. She pressed send, tucked the phone away, and walked toward the exit with her head held high, unaware that Mason had slipped away from the crowd and was now following her down the hall, guilt tightening his throat as he called out softly, "Wait, please," but Amara did not slow until she reached the quiet balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, where she finally turned to face him, her expression controlled but fierce, and before he could speak, she said, "Your family just lost $1 billion tonight," and his face went pale, his confident posture collapsing, the implications hitting him harder than any insult had hit her, but she wasn't finished, not yet, because this was only the beginning of a storm the Wentworths never saw coming. Mason felt the ground shift beneath him as Amara's words echoed like a verdict. Your family just lost $1 billion tonight, and in that moment the heir who had been raised on silk, legacy, and unearned praise suddenly felt stripped of every illusion about himself, especially as Amara stood before him, poised and resolute, her voice steady despite the humiliation she had endured inside the ballroom, and he realized with a pang of shame that he had done nothing, absolutely nothing, to stop it, so he stammered, "Please, just tell me what happened." But Amara met his gaze with a mixture of disappointment and exhaustion, replying, "You know what happened. You heard it. You saw it. Your silence was part of it," and though he tried to argue, his words fell apart because she was right, and silence was complicity, but Mason had no idea the storm that was already breaking loose in the world outside the balcony, because while they talked, notifications began blowing up across the screens of investors, journalists, and board members as Amara's CFO quietly initiated the automatic alerts that followed any terminated mega deal, alerts that rippled through the markets like distant explosions, causing investors who had tied their future to the Wentworth deal to panic, and soon phones all across the gala began buzzing with urgent messages. Deal cancelled. What happened? Immediate board meeting. Is this true? The whispers grew into a low roar as confusion spread, and inside the ballroom Victor Wentworth's jaw tightened as he scanned the crowd, sensing a shift in the air like a predator smelling smoke before seeing the fire. But on the balcony Mason was still scrambling for footing, insisting, "This isn't who I am. I don't talk like them," and Amara replied with piercing honesty, "Maybe not, but you let them," and that truth hit him harder than any shove, any punch, any failure he had ever known, for he had spent his whole life silently benefiting from the ugliness he refused to confront, because calling out his family meant jeopardizing his future, but now that future was already falling apart whether he spoke or not. "Tell me what I can do," he pleaded, and Amara shook her head gently, her voice softer now. "Do. Mason, this isn't about a deal anymore. It's about who your family really is, and who you are without their shadow." But before he could answer, the balcony doors slammed open and Lila appeared with two board members trailing behind her, fury twisting her perfectly powdered face as she snapped, "There you are. Father is livid, everyone's panicking, what did you do?" And when she spotted Amara beside Mason, her lips curled into a venomous smile. Of course. Of course this is about her. You dragged her out here to complain. Honestly, Mason, if she's upset about a joke," and that was the moment something inside Mason snapped, the moment years of swallowed objections, quiet discomfort, and moral hesitation finally erupted. He stepped forward, glaring at his sister with a coldness she had never seen in him and said, "It wasn't a joke. It was cruelty. And you made this mess, Lila. You and everyone who thought belittling someone was entertainment." But Lila only scoffed, turning her attention to Amara with a dismissive flip of her hair as she said, "You know what? I'm done pretending. This whole diversity circus has gone too far. You're blowing this out of proportion because you can't handle." But she never finished the sentence, because in that instant Victor Wentworth himself entered the balcony, his presence sucking the warmth from the air, his tailored suit stiff as armor, his posture towering like a judge entering a courtroom he already owned, and with a voice that sliced through the tension he said, "Everyone inside is panicking. Investors are demanding answers. I want to know, now, why our $1 billion agreement was terminated without warning," and his gaze fell on Amara like a blade, cold and entitled, and he added, "Who exactly are you to have that kind of authority?" But Amara didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't blink. Instead she stepped forward, meeting his glare with unwavering calm and said, "I'm the founder, majority shareholder, and lead inventor of Solvanta Energy, the company your empire needed to survive," and the shock that cracked across Victor's face was almost satisfying, but it was not enough to erase the insults he had hurled, nor the arrogance that had been displayed so openly inside the ballroom. So she continued, "You mock the very person who had the power to rescue your family's legacy," and gasps rippled through the doorway where several guests had begun gathering, eavesdropping in thinly veiled fascination, but Victor only narrowed his eyes, his voice dripping with condescension as he said, "And you expect me to believe someone like you?" But Mason stepped between them before he could finish that dangerous phrase, his fists clenched as he growled, "Don't say it." And though Victor glared at his son, he said nothing, but Amara had already heard enough. She reached for the balcony railing, grounding herself as she announced loud enough for every onlooker to hear, "The Wentworth family has shown me everything I needed to see tonight. I will not partner with people who demean others, who treat inclusion like charity, who equate skin tone with worth, who think wealth grants them the right to disrespect strangers in their own home." And at that moment security radios crackled through the room as the news reached even the staff. The cancellation of the deal had caused a domino effect, stock values dropping, investors backing out, banks re-evaluating credit lines, and people inside the ballroom began whispering frantically, some stepping away from the family, some glaring at them, some quietly slipping out before their names became entangled in the fallout. Victor, increasingly desperate, hissed, "You don't understand what you're doing. You're destroying generational wealth, an entire legacy, over petty emotions." And Amara let out a breath of disbelief, replying, "You think dignity is petty? Respect is petty? Basic humanity is petty?" Then she shook her head slowly, her voice calm but lethal, "No, Mr. Wentworth, I'm not destroying your legacy. You did that all by yourself." And with that she turned to leave, walking back into the corridor with regal grace, but Mason rushed after her, catching her before she reached the grand staircase, and though she expected another apology, another plea, instead he surprised her by saying, "I'm not asking you to reconsider the deal. I know that's gone. But please, don't walk out of this story believing we're all like them." And for the first time something in Amara softened, not enough to forgive, not enough to forget, but enough to pause, because she sensed sincerity in his voice, a sincerity absent in everyone else inside the estate. Yet before she could respond, alarms began ringing from the ballroom as a projector lit up unexpectedly with confidential financial documents, Wentworth ledgers, internal communications, hidden losses, unethical loopholes, exposing the family's corruption to every guest within seconds, triggering screams, chaos, outrage, and absolute pandemonium as Lila shrieked, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" While Victor lunged for the projector like a cornered animal, but it was too late. The truth had spilled out publicly, uncontrollably, and Mason froze with horror as he recognized the documents, not because he leaked them, but because he knew exactly who had access to them. Only one person could have done this, and that realization sent a shockwave of dread through his chest as he whispered, "Oh no, oh God, it's my brother." And Amara turned sharply, "Brother?" But Mason nodded, pale as death, "Ethan. He's been fighting my father for years. He wants to burn the whole empire to the ground. And now he's used your cancelled deal as the spark." And Amara's heart pounded as the implications twisted into an entirely new threat, because Ethan hadn't just exposed corruption, he had set off a chain reaction powerful enough to destroy more than the Wentworth name. He had dragged her company's reputation into the storm as well, and for the first time that night, Amara felt a chill of true danger as Mason whispered, "Ethan isn't finished, he's coming here." Chaos had reached a fever pitch inside the Wentworth estate as Ethan Wentworth, the black sheep of the family and Mason's estranged younger brother, appeared suddenly in the grand hall, a man whose sharp intelligence had long been hidden behind a veil of resentment, fueled by years of being overlooked, underestimated, and excluded from the family fortune. And now, seeing the empire's foundation crumble under the public exposure triggered by Amara's cancelled deal, he moved with cold precision, slipping past panicked staff and gawking guests, his laptop clutched under one arm, wires and flash drives peeking from his suit pockets, as he broadcast damning evidence of the Wentworth's shady offshore accounts, failed environmental compliance, and manipulated investor reports, all perfectly timed to coincide with the market's reaction to the $1 billion deal collapse. And as Victor tried to confront him, Ethan's voice cut through the panic like a whip, calm but terrifying, "You thought you could control everything. Legacy, respect, billion-dollar deals. Look around. You've been exposed for what you really are." And the family froze, their social masks slipping, their power unraveling live in front of every guest and investor, while Amara, standing just outside the hall with Mason, felt a wave of vindication but also tension, because Ethan's actions, though just, risked dragging her own company into regulatory scrutiny if the wrong eyes connected the dots. Yet she did not flinch. Instead, she leaned close to Mason and said, "Let's turn this storm into something no one can ignore." And together they coordinated with her legal team remotely, instructing her CFO to publicly release her company's patents, licenses, and compliance certifications, proving beyond any doubt that Solvanta Energy had acted ethically, responsibly, and with innovation, while the Wentworths had only relied on their privilege and arrogance to maintain dominance. And as Ethan's exposé continued, live feeds from phones and social media turned the gala into an international scandal in real time, trending across Twitter, Instagram, and news outlets. Hashtags like #WentworthExposed, #AmaraWins, and #Billionaire humiliation skyrocketing, investors calling for emergency meetings, boards reconsidering partnerships, and the police quietly arriving to investigate financial fraud. While inside the hall, Victor's face had gone pale, Lila was shrieking at her father, Mason was frozen in disbelief, and Ethan simply stood with the calm of a man who had finally balanced the scales, while Amara, recognizing the chaos as the perfect moment to assert control, stepped into the hall and with one precise, commanding statement said, "Your family's empire ends tonight because of your choices. My company survives because of ours. And anyone who respects innovation, ethics, and humanity will now follow our lead." And the effect was instantaneous. Whispers of admiration, fear, and relief flowed from investors and guests alike, many realizing for the first time that Amara's intelligence and decisiveness had been underestimated. And in the weeks that followed, the Wentworth empire collapsed under lawsuits, market losses, and regulatory investigations, while Solvanta Energy soared, gaining contracts worldwide. And Mason, humbled and grateful, sought out Amara again, not as a businessman but as someone seeking moral guidance, finally understanding what it meant to stand for something beyond wealth and status. And Amara, seeing sincerity in his eyes, offered him a chance to help rebuild ethically, under her mentorship, while Ethan disappeared into the background, his revenge complete, leaving only a whisper of warning to those who equated cruelty with power. And in a final, symbolic gesture, Amara hosted a press conference at the very site of the gala, addressing the world with poise, announcing new global partnerships, renewable energy initiatives, and philanthropic programs for communities long ignored by billionaires like the Wentworths. And as cameras flashed and reporters scribbled, she ended with a simple, unforgettable line: "Wealth is meaningless without respect. Power is hollow without justice. And legacy is measured by the lives you lift, not the fortunes you hoard." And in that moment, Amara Holt, the woman who had been mocked, belittled, and underestimated, became a symbol of justice, innovation, and unwavering strength, proving that one act of courage, one decision to stand firm against cruelty, could indeed change the world, topple empires, and redefine what it meant to hold power, leaving the Wentworths to face the consequences of their arrogance and everyone else to witness the rise of a new force, relentless, brilliant, and unafraid. Dash dash dash.